You notice when you do the research and you look at just your history, I mean, you had the weight of a feather in the Huffington Post. I mean, that's no small feat by any means.
I think it was a bit of luck.
How did that come about?
Well, it's quite active on social media, and I happened to just come across a comment from one of the groups that I'm in saying, oh, the Huffington Post is accepting short stories. So I thought, oh, why not? Why not? So I submitted this story, The Weight of a Feather, and I forgot about it. And 2 weeks later, I got this email saying, I had pet chickens as a child. I loved your story. We're publishing it in the Huffington Post. And I was like, oh, I can't believe it. And I think it's because the story captures, in essence, it's this girl whose pet chickens are taken away from her, and she cuts herself off from love. And at the end of the story, she opens herself up to love again. So there was quite a bit of poignancy in that story. And I think that's what spoke to the editor of the Huffington Post, because those are universal issues. Love is a universal issue. And the fact that the Huffington Post is America, and I'm sitting here in South Africa, love crosses all boundaries. And I think that's what turned the tide in my favor with that story.
Why do we love short stories at the moment? Because, I mean, for a while it was struggling against the long formatted novels.
Yeah. I'm a great fan of short stories because I think today's world is so busy. You know, who's got time to sit and read 800 pages? And something like short stories, you can start it, you can finish it in a quick time, then you can move on to the next one.
You can even put it down after the one story, and it's kind of the stories that move along with you. When you have time, you can pick up the book again.
Exactly, and you know, you can also read other things in between, but then you can go back and you can pick up a short story. You can read it if you're in a bus on the way to work. You can quickly read one story, you can finish it from the start of your journey to the end of your journey. And I actually think short stories are just starting to ride a wave, and I think they're going to just take off. So
what was happening in your life when you put the collection of short stories together? Because for me, I get a sense that some of them could have been longer, probably longer formatted, maybe a novel.
Yes, I think, no, none of these stories I think would have developed into a novel. What happened was, in my personal life, circumstances weren't, my dad was ill, and so I didn't have time to focus on a full-length novel. And I am at heart a novelist. But because of, we were caring for my dad, who was a much-loved person, and I didn't have time to focus because obviously my focus was on him and my mom and everything. And so short stories, poetry, you can write it quickly, you don't have to focus for long. And the short stories just developed out of that. And some of the stories, I like flash fiction. So that's, a lot of people have said that some of the stories were too short for them. But you would never believe this, but sometimes I talk a little bit much, and I find I find in my short stories that in my writing I like to push myself to try and write as tight as possible, because you think of Ernest Hemingway, his best story to me is that short little 7-word story, For Sale, 1 pair of baby shoes, unused. I mean, how emotional is that? I mean, that is just, in so few words he has said so much, and that is why some of my short stories I try to keep them short, to try and get as much emotion in as few words as possible. And it suited my personal circumstances as well, because I didn't have time
to sit
I
down
didn't have
and dedicate
uninterrupted hours to sit and write a novel. So the short stories and my poetry volume that I brought out last year were sort of arose out of that, and also trying to challenge myself to write tight, even if I can't speak tight.
Which one do you prefer? Because you're one of those writers that seem to fit in every box.
You mean which genre do I prefer writing in?
You do the poems, you do poetry, you do short stories.
My first love is novels. But I surprised myself, if I say so myself, I surprised myself with the short stories, because The Last Sacrifice in this story, which a lot of people, you either hate it or you love it because it's quite a brutal story. But in actual fact, I was invited by the Elephant Press in the US to submit for an anthology of apocalyptic stories. And I've never written that. I said, forget it. I used to write romance. I write about love. I write about life and all of those things. I don't write horror and apocalyptic stories. And I thought, well, why not? Let's try it. And I surprised myself with that story.
Judy, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining me. This is definitely worth getting. That was author Judy Croome with her anthology of short stories. It's called The Weight of a Feather and Other Stories. It's available in all good bookstores. Let's head over to Lebo.